No matter how much I wish it wasn't, this story is completely true. I wasn't drunk and I wasn't high on any drugs. Neither was my friend, but I fear his state of mind might have been permanently altered due to his experience with these beings. Secondly, I like to consider myself a rational, thinking type of person with years of experience hunting and hiking around my hometown in Wyoming. I've seen all kinds of fauna and flora, so I didn't confuse what I saw for something entirely different. It all started when I went to a friend's house to celebrate his birthday. He was turning 18, and I was already 18 myself. His uncle, a man more native to the land than myself, was 27. Let's call this friend James. I finally got to his house at about 4 p.m. that night. It was January 25th. Since he effectively lived in the middle of nowhere and at the foothills of the Rockies, I was keen on bringing something with me in case I ran into some trouble, like a bear or something of the like. So I brought along with me a .357 Magnum and some binoculars in case my friend wanted to try and hunt some coyotes with his .223 rifle. We started doing our normal routine for most of the day, playing games on his computer, watching some TV, and just chilling out and talking about school. His parents were away on a business trip to a nearby town, so they left James and his uncle the house to themselves. The thing that James loved the most in the world was easily his dogs. He had 2 chocolate labs and a golden retriever. The retriever was actually fairly old. This being Wyoming and people not really giving a hoot, the dogs were left out all day. They came and went as they pleased back to his house. Sometime around 8 or 9 p.m., we heard his dogs begin barking at something off in the distance. At this point, the sun was long gone, but the full moon gave an amazing amount of light. I looked through the nearby window in the direction of the dogs barking. Even with the moon shining against the snow, I could not see anything up to the tree line that was nearly a mile away. "There's nothing there," I said. "Are you sure? They don't even bark at deer anymore," James whispered to me. The whole situation was weird. Fast forward an hour, and his dogs have not been heard or seen since the barking started. His uncle was buzzed and watching something on their huge TV. James was beginning to worry that something happened to his dogs. Now, wolves can still be dangerous in the Rockies, and they have no problem taking down a random dog that wanders into the woods. This is the moment where I started to get anxious, partly because he wanted to get his dog back, and partly because wolves sometimes kill sheep or even cows. So if they were desperate, I'm sure they would have no problem with us. Even still, those dogs were his family. So we grabbed our guns and we headed outside. We were armed with heavy clothing, as well as my .357, the binoculars, and his .223 rifle. We braced ourselves and we headed out into the Wyoming winter with temperatures 20 below freezing, going the direction of where we last saw his dogs. The whole time we walked toward the tree line, my veins were being flooded with adrenaline, the same feeling I got every time I hunted. But tonight we definitely weren't hunters. We were about 300 yards away from the tree line when James suddenly stopped. With my eyes trained on the ground and looking for signs of an animal, I almost ran into him. He just stared at the tree line. He kept whispering for me to look at the trees. Slowly, he raised his left index finger towards the foothills of the mountains. As soon as he knew I was looking towards the trees, he readied his rifle and pointed it towards them. I noticed at this point that his breathing was extremely rapid and raspy, like he just witnessed a fatal car crash right in front of him. At that point, I honestly didn't know what he was talking about. I scanned the tree line over and over. I crouched down to sit on the snow. I used the binoculars towards where he pointed. It took me about 30 seconds, but eventually I saw what scared the hell out of him. There was something out there, and it wasn't human, and it wasn't his dogs. Something on 4 legs came out from behind a tree at the edge of the forest. It must have been about 3 feet tall at the shoulder. Of course, at first I assumed it was a wolf, or maybe even a small bear. A few seconds later, several more of these things came out of the woods. I didn't pause to try and count them, but there was at least 6 or 7, and who knows how many more were hiding in the trees still. We watched them slowly walk out of the trees for several minutes, These animals seemed strangely cautious or slow for whatever reason. Maybe they were scared of people. Then they eventually stopped as a howl from a dog or wolf came out from behind us. It was far enough away for us to not worry about it, but close enough for the unknown animals out there to hear the howl as well. I looked back through the binoculars and could almost make out the general texture of these creatures. They were now about 275 yards away. They looked pale and thin. They still appeared to be something like wolves or even large dogs. But my heart began to race when I saw what they did next. These things, whatever they were, picked up their pace fast, reaching speeds of what looked like 15 to 20 miles per hour, judging from how fast they closed their distance to the direction of the howl. And coincidentally, this was almost right at us. After a minute or so, James lost it and tried to get up to run away. I grabbed him and threw him on the ground as he started to run, but this caught the attention of the beasts, and they stopped. James and I, frozen with fear, sat down in the snow, weapons ready. I almost lost it as well when I noticed that the eyes of these things reflected the moonlight. They were orange in color. They didn't really glow like in some stories of cryptids. They were more piercing. We stared at them, and they stared back at us for what seemed like hours until one of these creatures stood up on its back legs. At this moment, all of my knowledge on hunting and animals was meaningless. I knew that some animals could stand up on their back legs, but they could never do it very long. I audibly counted to see how long it stayed like that. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then James screamed and pointed his .223 to the right. I looked in his direction, and I saw a creature on the left side of the group begin to get up, and it ran away from the pack. Dumbfounded, I turned my attention to the rest of them, and I told James to keep watching the one that ran away. I do a quick count of the ones that remained, the ones that were staring us down. There were only 4. My heart pounded out of my chest. There was no way we could have lost something so large on these plains. They're completely flat and covered in snow. I looked to our left, and then I saw it. It was crouched down and trying not to be seen. I realized how smart these things were, much smarter than I would have ever expected. These things, they were flanking us. I whispered to James my suspicions of what's going on, and he had the same thought. I made up a quick plan in my head, and I relayed it to James, our best course of action. I told him to start backing away slowly, but to always maintain eye contact. As soon as I finished telling him my idea, I do another quick count. Now only 3 pairs of orange eyes. Another one went somewhere. The one that first stood was starting to walk towards us. I helped James up, and I told him to keep an eye on our right side, while I looked to the left. We backed away, but these beasts walked with us, maintaining their distance the whole time. Eventually, we were only about 100 yards from his house before we turned and ran to his front door. We booked it towards his porch lights, no longer caring to be coy about the situation. Foolishly, I stopped 50 feet short of the porch, and I turned around. Maybe it was curiosity. I don't know, but I regretted it the moment I did it. My body seized up the moment I saw it. Those creatures stopped as soon as I made eye contact. With the creatures ever so slightly illuminated by the porch lights, I realized that these things seemed otherworldly. They were tall, probably 6 or 7 feet, and they were insanely thin and lanky, almost like a basketball player. They were so pale, and they stared right back with these intense orange eyes from before. I just looked back, less afraid but more curious, and a few seconds later, James screamed, "What are you doing?" I pulled myself out of the weird trance I found myself in, and I sprinted towards his house. I jumped inside and bolted the door, all while his drunk uncle swore at us for making too much noise. I looked out of the windows with my gun in hand, but I didn't see a thing. Nothing but fresh tracks. I pulled the curtains back where they were, and we heard the strangest noise, anything other than a person I've ever heard. It sounded like a dog's howl, but it repeated, almost like it was coming from a Siamang gibbon, in repeated pulses in different pitches and tones. The uncle looked like he instantly sobered up after hearing it, and he started locking all the doors and windows in the house. To our surprise, all of James's dogs were back, but they were very frightened and confused, cowering in a corner. We watched through the windows for almost the entire night until I eventually needed to fall asleep, but we never had any other problems since. Whatever these things were, they were fast, they were smart, and they were nothing I've ever seen before. It looked like some strange dog man straight from tribal legend. I'm not a superstitious type of guy, but I hope it was somehow just a really elaborate dream, even if my friend and his uncle can recall the night too.
In late June of 2014, a 28-year-old German man by the name of Lars Mittank took a vacation to the Bulgarian seaside resort of Golden Sands. Popular with tourists from all over Europe, Golden Sands is a major resort town on the northern Bulgarian Black Sea coast, adjacent to a national park of the same name in the municipality of Varna. Located just over 15 kilometers north of downtown Varna, it is virtually connected to the city by a continuous swath of resorts and villa communities. On the 6th of July, Lars and his group of friends found themselves in a disagreement with another group of young German men in a local bar. Lars and his companions were fans of the German football team Werder Bremen, while the opposing group were Bayern Munich supporters. There was a rather high-profile rivalry between the two football clubs, and the playful disagreement soon descended into a violent confrontation when one member of each group began pushing and shoving each other. The fight between the two of them quickly became a full-on bar brawl between the two groups. Chairs and bottles were thrown, pool cues were used as weapons, and in the fray, Mittank suffered a ruptured eardrum from a particularly vicious strike. Mittank was forced to visit the local doctor to have his head examined. It was discovered that the injury was a particularly nasty one that came with a rather high risk of internal infection. So the doctor prescribed a course of the antibiotic cefuroxime and advised Lars not to fly for the next couple of weeks, as it would risk seriously exacerbating the injury and cause a grievous amount of pain. It would also require another examination at the Bulgarian hospital in the coming weeks in order to ensure the wound was properly on the mend. So, Lars stayed in Bulgaria while his friends drove to the airport and flew back to Germany. He took a taxi back to the Hotel Color Varna, making reservations that would cover his recuperation period, then tried to spend the next few days relaxing and healing from his particularly nasty wound. But just a day after his friends left him behind in Bulgaria, Lars began to act very oddly indeed. His bizarre and erratic behavior was captured by the hotel's closed-circuit television security cameras. He ran around the hotel, looking over his shoulder, accusing staff and guests alike of plotting against him. A few of those encounters almost turned violent, and on more than one occasion, the hotel staff threatened to call the police. Finally, once Lars's behavior had become unbearable, the hotel staff asked him to gather his belongings and leave, as such violent outbursts were strictly against hotel policy and could no longer be tolerated. But before he checked out of the hotel, Lars made a call to his mother back in Germany. She later stated that he seemed extremely upset, and told her in hushed tones that 4 German men, possibly the same his friend group fought with in the bar that day, were coming to kill him. He told her that he had made a significant withdrawal of cash to live off of and that she should cancel his credit cards. When she asked why, Lars told her that the men could use them to track his movements. Where he got such an idea is a mystery, but he seemed very, very insistent that this was the case. We know that on the 8th of July, Lars Mittank traveled to Varna Airport in an attempt to travel back home to Germany, against the doctor's wishes. He attempted to purchase a ticket on a flight back home, but after looking around the airport and apparently seeing something, became so flustered and frightened that he abandoned the attempt altogether. Lars then sought out a medical services area of the airport, although it is clear that he did not ask for any medical attention and would not tell those inside why he wished to remain there. They later confirmed that he seemed jumpy and paranoid, as if though he was hiding from someone that was hunting him. About 45 minutes after originally taking shelter in the medical services area, the airport's CCTV cameras captured some kind of construction worker making their way over to the medical area. This seems to have triggered Lars into rushing out of the airport, having abandoned his backpack and luggage altogether. More CCTV footage shows Lars running across a 2-lane highway, dodging speeding vehicles as he does so before reaching a large fence. Lars scaled the fence with frightening strength and speed, then sprints full pelt across a meadow before disappearing into a field of sunflowers with a set of deep woods beyond them. Police investigated the incident thoroughly but found no evidence that Lars was being followed by anyone. They even contacted the group Lars's friends had fought with, but they all had alibis that confirmed that they were nowhere near the airport on the day of Lars' disappearance. Many theories about what happened are all over the internet. Some theories believe that he was being used as a drug mule. Some believe that he suffered a psychotic episode. Only 2 things are completely certain regarding this behavior and unexplainable incident. The first is that Lars did not suffer from any form of mental illness. The second is that Lars was never seen again, anywhere, or by anyone.
Many of us have that creepy uncle. Maybe you are that creepy uncle. Author A.T. White tells us why you should even fear your own family. Now remember, I don't want you talking with him unless I'm around, you hear?
Yes, Dad.
I am serious, and tuck in your shirt. He's here. The front door swung open, and there stood Uncle Tommy, drenched in sweat from a day's work in the summer heat.
It's a scorcher out there, ain't it? He said, putting his bag on the floor and untying his boots. I appreciate you letting me crash for the night.
Yes, so as long as you're gone in the morning, my dad replied.
Of course.
Now Uncle Tommy said, turning to me, lowering himself to a knee.
Where's my hug at? Been a while since I've seen you last.
I took a couple of steps toward him and leaned in for a hug. His tight embrace made me uncomfortable, and I let out a light whimper.
Boy, don't you know it's 100 degrees out there?
He asked, tugging at my long sleeves. I haven't been outside all day, I recited to him. Don't you have some chores to finish up? Dad interjected. I knew that was my cue to leave, so I shuffled off to my room. Later that night, I lay in bed. I tossed and turned, unable to get comfortable, when I heard the turn of footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. After several long seconds of silence, the door opened quietly. A dark silhouette of a man entered the room, and the door closed again. For several more seconds, there was nothing but unrelenting silence. I might have thought I had dreamt it all, if it weren't for the sound of a hushed breath being carefully released. I can feel him getting nearer. The warmth of another person in the room was unfamiliar at this hour. I was not prepared for this. I prayed he would go away, to even come back in the morning if he must. He reached down and touched me. He rolled me onto my stomach and lifted up my shirt. From the corner of my eye, I could see 2 things: the faint beam of a pocket flashlight and Uncle Tommy studying my bare skin. His rough fingers run up and down my back. Suddenly, he got up and walked to the bedroom door and left. I tried again to fall asleep and eventually succeeded. He was gone by the time I awoke. Around noon, the phone rang while my father was out. "Hello?" I said. "Hey, buddy." "Uncle Tommy?" "Yeah, your dad around?" No, sir. He went to the store. Not good, he said, sounding a bit nervous as he paused for a moment. I am calling about last night. I don't know if you were awake or not. I was, I replied. Well then, I'll just get right to it. I've got a question for you, and I need for you to be honest with me. Can you do that? Yes, sir. How'd you get all of them bruises?
This incident occurred during my second year of college, sometime in the fall of 2002. All 4 years there, I worked as a waitress in a small family restaurant next to campus. The pay was far from adequate, but the owners treated me like one of them. Growing up without parents made this connection very important to me, so much so they remain an important part of my life to this day. I was one of 4 girls working nights, and 3 of us were students currently attending the university. The surrounding neighborhood had been on a downward slide for the past 20 years. Even with a large number of students inhabiting the area, crime was still steadily on the rise. In order to at least try to prevent ourselves from becoming victims of said crime, several safety measures were implemented. All the usual things, escorting each other to our cars, not leaving the back door open, things like that. However, no matter how hard you try to be safe, some a-hole will find a way to violate you anyway. One late night, just as we were wrapping up the dinner shift, a giant idiot would do just this and, in the process, almost cause a beautiful family to collapse. That night, we were quickly coming on the end of another regular dinner shift when a man came in and said he wanted to get something to go. No problem. I took his order and gave it to the kitchen. Working the kitchen that night was Matt, the owner's only son, and he wasn't happy when he saw it. He tried to throw it together as fast as possible so he could finish cleaning and head home. While he waited, the man paced nervously, looking outside repeatedly. This behavior seemed kind of shady, so I stopped my closing duties and began looking outside to see if I could see what he was looking at. It took a minute, but I caught sight of another man standing just out of view of the bay windows. This guy was dirty-looking. His hair looked like it hadn't been washed or combed in years. The second man's actions were very similar to the others, almost as if though they were about to rob us. I foolishly pushed my instincts aside and began ringing up the man's orders. When I gave him the total, he quickly handed me a $20 bill and looked behind him. I continued to ignore his behavior, and when I opened the drawer, I heard a man's voice quietly tell me to give him all the money in the register. Maybe from instinct, I looked up to see who it was. It was all coming from the customer, and he was holding a handgun at my face. "Keep your voice down and don't panic. Just give me the money and I'll leave." This entire time I had been the only employee in the front of the house, so he had me at his mercy. Every word he said quivered as it came from his mouth. His fear made mine even worse. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed every cent out of the drawer and was about to hand it to him when I heard Matt's voice coming from behind me. "Did you forget something?" Everything that happened after this went by so fast. I still question my recollection of events to this day. I know for sure that Matt's arrival surprised us both, but the look on the customer or robber's face was pure shock. The second I noticed him moving the gun away from my face, I crouched behind the podium to hide. The gunfire followed soon after that. I wasn't sure if Matt had been shot at this point. I was still curled up on the floor with my arms over my head, very similar to a child hiding under the covers in hopes the boogeyman will go away. I don't know how long I stayed like that. A few seconds, maybe. When I did peek out from my arms, all I saw was Matt's body laying motionless on the floor. Even then, I stayed where I was until I heard the voice of his mom yelling out to us. That's when I finally stood up to see the results. The shooter was gone, and money was scattered all over the floor from where I dropped it. Matt more than likely died immediately. At his feet, grilled chicken salad was scattered everywhere like the money. Matt's mom stormed out of the back. When she saw her only son lying on the floor, she collapsed in grief next to him, and this is where she stayed until the police arrived. Just to avoid making an already long story longer, I'll leave you with the facts. Even after telling the cops everything I saw and giving a detailed description of both men, neither man was caught. The family closed the restaurant for several days after the shooting and stayed that way until a few days after the funeral. From the day of the reopening, a cop in plain clothes has protected the place, and there hasn't ever been another holdup since. My work at the restaurant would continue for the remainder of my time at the university. I was shaken up for quite a while, and may have been for far longer if it wasn't for the love and support of the family. We seem to have served as a coping mechanism for one another, and through the shared pain of Matt's death, brought closer together. After I graduated, I moved on and am currently living in Atlanta with my partner. The restaurant continues running 5 days a week and doing well. It seems the neighborhood may be on its way up. In the last year, several large companies have opened branches, and the continued growth has proved to be a positive thing for all concerned. Allison, the matriarch of the family, recently told me on a phone call that she was willing to put up with the hipsters that were slowly invading the area. After all, they were a big step up from the murdering crackheads that had been seen there before. I practice Taekwondo in a stadium in my city. It's a dangerous place, but I have been living all my life there and nothing has happened to me, so normally I forget about the robs and drugs and all of that. One day I was chatting with a friend in the entrance of the stadium, and there was a guy shirtless and with a lot of muscles. He was just standing in front of a wall reading something, so none of us care about him. Some minutes later we say goodbye and leave to different places. I decide to walk to my house. I live about 30 to 40 minutes away. Because I had time and was a nice day, so while I was walking, I saw the same guy from before. He was walking in the street and fighting with the drivers. All I thought was that he was on some drugs and just kept walking. About 10 minutes later, he disappeared. Some minutes passed and nothing happened. I was just listening to music and walking. But 20 minutes later, or more or less, the guy passed me. I was kind of shocked because he appeared from nowhere. But he passed me, so I thought I was being way too paranoid. Then he stands in the same cross I was, and he watched me. I felt weird and texted my mom that I was close to home and asked her to open the door. It's important to describe my house for this. I live in a 3rd floor, but it's not a normal building. There are houses in the ground level, with 2nd floor backyard and everything. In between 2 houses there is a stair that lets you in the 3rd floor. There are more houses over the ones on the ground level, and I live on the 3rd. So when I get to the stairs, the door was open and my dog was waiting for me. So I sit on the floor and pet her. Then my mom was like, "Be careful, there's someone behind you. Move so he can pass." I reply with an okay, stand up and went to the stairs without looking back. We started walking to my door. I went inside my house and looked back, and there he was. The shirtless guy was behind me all along, and he just was standing outside of my house. My mom closed the door and freaked out. She asked me if I knew him, if he had talked to me or something. I looked at her confused, still shocked. She started calling my dad, loud enough so the guy outside could hear it. My dad didn't hear her, but that was enough. The guy finally left. This happened some months ago, but it still freaks me out. He saw me, and he followed me, and now he knows where I live.